Hello, Wisdom Café. I am talking today to Rich Lyons, the Dean of the Haas School of Business here at UC Berkeley. Hi, Rich.
Hello.
Thank you for sitting down with me today.
Thank you.
Can you start with a brief synopsis of your career path and how long you've been at UC Berkeley?
Sure. Well, I was a Berkeley undergrad, so I guess I was here quite a while ago. And then Berkeley so inspired me to go on. I was a business major. I was planning to go into business. I come from a more businessy family. But it so turned me on to the academic life that I went on and got a PhD in economics and then became an academic. So I went from graduate school to New York City. My first job was at Columbia Business School. And then after 6 years there, 6 years that I loved, I got an opportunity to come back to Berkeley, right? And that was a very joyful moment when I returned to Berkeley as a faculty member. That was the early 1990s.
Okay.
And I've been here ever since. I've been dean of the business school. This is my 9th year as dean of Berkeley's business school.
That's great. What defining moments have occurred in your life or your career, and how have they shaped you?
Oh, there are always important ones. One that jumps out immediately to me, I mentioned that transition for me into thinking about a business life, into thinking about a more academic life, a life of ideas and education. And that happened. I think the trigger there was, it was a faculty member. I was a sophomore at Berkeley. I was taking intermediate macroeconomics, a faculty member from Haas, now retired. Her name is Frances Van Loo. I'd written a midterm. I loved economics. And I'd written a midterm. She liked it. She was handing the midterm back. I'd never spoken to her one-on-one, but she said, come talk to me in my office when I went to see her. She said, have you ever thought about getting a PhD in economics?
And you're a sophomore.
And I'm a sophomore.
Wow.
And so the answer was absolutely no. In fact, neither of my parents has a 4-year degree. So this was not something that was on my radar screen, right? And I, to be honest with you, when I left her office, it wasn't on my radar screen. It's sort of like, well, that's a crazy idea. But she planted a seed. So that was absolutely fundamental. And then, what there are many others. Let me pull one out that I got to work summers. We had a neighbor who was a general contractor, and I got to work with him, sort of learning how to do general contracting, and they were smaller jobs and things like that. It wasn't giant developments, right? Building garages and things like that. But I so enjoyed that I actually started my own company after I stopped working for him. It wasn't a big company. I was building redwood hot tubs and decks and installing them, and boy did I enjoy that. But owning and running one's own business, it became a thrill to me, and that I never would have got there if not for that experience.
So you have the small business and the corporate, both sides of the experience.
Yeah. I think that sort of love of business is what. So I went to an economics department, but ended up at a business school. There are lots of economists in business schools, but it was sort of the marriage of the two, the kind of academic, philosophical, and also the practical that was, for me, a real sweet spot. I loved it.
So you also served as the chief learning officer for the company, focused on leadership development.
Yeah.
And so I know that you are a huge proponent of leadership development. Yeah. You speak about leadership. I've had you come to my leadership development program when I was running that to talk about it. What does it mean to you to be a leader?
Well, that is a very big question. I think, one of the things I talk to the students about here, the business students here, MBAs and undergrads, is I will often say, you have achieved what you've already achieved, and they've already achieved quite a bit, because you have a success formula that's based mostly on being a great individual contributor. And the way you're going to have your biggest impact in your life on the world is going forward, working with and through other people. And that's a fundamental transition. And we don't always think about it that way, but it is a transition that will happen, that society needs to happen, actually. Society needs kind of more from you. It's a business jargon word, but it's kind of leverage, right? We need more from you, and working through and with other people. So that's a fundamental component of it. That's sort of inward looking, the gestalt, the psychological shift of thinking about oneself as kind of doing work with and through other people.
You spearheaded the development of the 4 defining principles for Haas that apply to both faculty, staff, and students here. I love their principles. I actually have a magnet of them on my filing cabinet. The principles are: question the status quo, confidence without attitude, beyond yourself, and students always. Since you're speaking to our staff learning community today, can you talk about that last principle, student always, and how you live that in your life and your work?
Oh, thanks. So, you used the word spearheaded. I appreciate your use of that word. A lot of people worked on those defining principles, and one thing that I always start with is I said, we codified what was here already. We didn't create those three things. And I think that, or those four principles, that's important to remember because, I haven't ever come across anybody who said that those principles don't apply to all of Berkeley, right? I mean, you listen to those principles or question the status quo, no one would ever say, oh, that's Haas and not Berkeley, right? No, in fact, they might, say the other. That's Berkeley as DNA as it gets. Anyways, your question was about students always. So for one view on students always is this kind of notion of lifelong learning, and it's really much bigger than that. So I usually explain it a couple different ways, but one way that I explain it is learning when learning is hard. Okay, now we're all curious, especially those of us that chose a life at the university, right? We're curious people, and we're human beings are always learning at some level. But let me give you two examples of learning when learning is hard. So when you are at near the end of your career, sort of the summit of your achievements, do you know you still have feedback to hear from people? Do the people who work for and with you know that you know that? Right? It is very easy for sort of hubris to set in and for people to think, I'm fully baked, look at me, right? And that's just never the right mindset, right? So learning, students always is a lot harder than it sounds. So I'll give you one other example. This is a little bit more on the personal side, but I got to go to Costa Rica with my family recently, right? My French is pretty strong. Took a lot of French when I was here at Berkeley. My Spanish is not strong. I was working very hard on my Spanish. I was doing Duolingo and working hard, and my kids have had more Spanish than I have, right? So their Spanish is stronger, their vocabulary is stronger. So we're in Costa Rica. We're in restaurants, and every time we were in a restaurant, my kids, 13 and 16, they were speaking English. Every time I ordered in Spanish. And it was now, my Spanish is stumbling. I wanted my kids to see me stumble. I wanted them to see me working hard at something, right? And part of why languages, I think, are difficult for adults is because we don't like to look stupid in front of other people, right? And so I wanted them to see that. And,
so there was a
there's
humility
there was a kind of meta message, right? It's like learning is hard. Are you ready to go out into the arena and learn when it's hard? And so that's part of what we mean by students always. Yeah.
Thank you. What do you find the most rewarding and the most challenging aspects of your role?
So on rewarding, somebody said to me when I first became dean, it was very helpful advice, said, don't ever forget that in a seat like this, you need to be the chief purpose officer. You need to connect people to the meaning in this. And just because we do education, which is a wonderful thing, doesn't mean everybody around you working at this institution is going to have a sense of that meaning. Because understand that many of them are spending 70 or 80% of their time, for example, processing travel vouchers, right? They're not in the classroom. They're not seeing the students. They're not listening to the faculty. I get to hear all that stuff, not all the time, but I know it's there and I participate in it. They don't, so make sure you keep them connected to that. And I think, there's a tremendous source of meaning, right? I think those of us that have an opportunity to be meaning makers in the world, that is making for ourselves as well, right? There's a sense of purpose and value in that, right? And so that's pretty fundamental to what I love about the job, is that it not only is this meaningful work, but because we're shaping talent that is going to have a huge influence on the world, right? Part of it is, this is not something I distaste, it's just that the complexity of making change happen in any modern enterprise, but I think this one is particularly complex. It fascinates me, right? It's sort of like, if you have these two conversations in the wrong order, something's not going to happen right? It's sort of, somebody's going to be bent out of shape. And so the subtlety, the nuance of having change happen when the sequencing of a couple conversations or a few other things matters so much, it demands a lot of attention. And I guess, there are times that after 9 years, just speaking completely frankly, right, where it's sort of like, wow, I guess I'm kind of exhausted at this particular moment, right? And we're never exhausted all the time. I'm not saying I'm done. I'm simply saying that, the reality of advancing an institution that is this complex is quite challenging.
Well, you've been very successful at it here.
Thank you for saying that.
Business school is very highly rated. It's successful on many measures.
I appreciate that. Yeah.
What advice would you give a young new staff member beginning their career?
When we talk about what makes a fit enterprise, nonprofit, for-profit, education, whatever, right? And when we think about a healthy work environment, what stimulates us? What makes our work environment a hot spot where we want to walk in every day and it's like fun? Okay. Now, in my experience and also reading research, one of the things that creates hotspots is when people's minds are in the game, when they are bringing ideas to the table, and it's safe to bring ideas to the table. It doesn't mean we will follow up on all of those ideas, but it's sort of like we are evolving quickly, right? And that change process or that evolution process that makes it feel like a hotspot is part of what, when we talk about questioning the status quo, right? It's not just questioning the status quo for one's own sake. It's sort of, I've heard it described this way. It's like people looking at the white space around their job and seeing it and asking themselves, should I fill it? And not necessarily saying, my job is defined this way. I know there's white space, but that's not my job. That's not as fun. That's not going to create a hotspot, right? I'd actually rather, so I'm not telling people you got to do more work than you thought you were going to do. I'm saying if we have this mindset of filling white space around our job or filling white space around, the function that we as a team fulfill, right? It will be more fun. So that's kind of a question the status way of thinking about what question the status quo is about. Sort of recognize that white space and fill it and bring your ideas on how to fill it. I won't go through all 4 of the defining principles, but I think the sense of beyond yourself. Let me touch on that one, right? A sense of stewardship for something larger, something beyond just us and our own careers or our family's needs. These are all important things, of course, right? But part of it is about what does it mean to kind of think about Berkeley as the institution that it is and to participate in it. And I think our staff, a lot of us are here because Berkeley's public at the end of the day, right? That it means something to be part of this public institution. Not just a public institution, but this public institution that is an exemplar for the world, right? I mean, if Berkeley should ever start sort of using business jargon, trade at a discount, right? Should be reputationally less than it is now, then public education will be trading as a discount, right? I mean, I think Berkeley's role in the way people think about public education is that important. And so I guess I would just, as part of Beyond Yourself is participating in that meaning, right?
And everything we know about millennials, who are going to shortly become the majority of our workforce, says that meaning, finding that meaning in their workplace and their employer, respecting the work that is done in their organizations, that's very important to them.
Totally agree. I think that's not just a fad. I think that is a secular sort of an enduring trend that people are less and less willing to separate their personal and professional lives. They're not willing to check their values at the door, as they say, right? They want something that lines up. And I expect that to continue. So Berkeley's very good at that, and it's part of why we have so much talent, staff talent, faculty talent across the board. Right? A lot of people choose this place because of these reasons. But I think we also need to be intentional about it. Right? It's sort of like let's make sure the value in what it means to be public is sort of something we articulate well, that we understand, that keeps us engaged in our work life, and even when it gets difficult, because it does get difficult.
What are you most grateful for, Rich?
Boy, there are just a lot of things. I've got a 13-year-old and a 16-year-old that I was. Here I am getting emotional. I was driving my son to school today, and we had one of these little conversations. It's just one of these little conversations, but he said to me the other day, I was actually, I'll just tell you a little story. I was kind of joking with him, okay, and I was bringing him to school. We were talking about the 4 defining principles. I said, Jake, he knows that I talk about those. So I said, Jake, today I'd like you to go to school and actually think about what your 4 defining principles are, okay? And then when I pick you up, we'll talk about what those principles are. I'm kind of joking, right? He looked over at me and he said, Dad, that's not a thing, okay? And he was joking back with me, right? But that phrase, that's not a thing, cracked me up, right? And we had another one of those conversations. So anyways, it is those, at the end of the day, it is those people at least for me, in our lives that have such impact. And of course, my kids, my wife, my family, that's for all of us, that's the proximate part of that. But I mentioned Fran Van Loo, this faculty member that sort of sent me on a totally different course. There's several other people that sort of gave me an opportunity. It's sort of like, wow, thank you, right? I mean, totally changed a bunch of, a whole spectrum of opportunities opened up because they did something for me. And so I'm very grateful for those mentors, and I hope I'm doing that in recognizing how important that was to me. I hope I'm getting better at doing that for other people.
Well, Rich, I love your passion, and I love your ideas and the wisdom that you've shared with us so far today. Is there anything else you'd like to share with our Wisdom Cafe community?
Well, look, I love the fact that we are even doing this, so thank you for the initiative. I think, as we share what it is that helps make us all advance and evolve just a little bit faster, right? I think about my own role, as I mentioned, I did my 9th year as dean, but there's still things that you realize, holy smokes, I was not really understanding this thing over there, right? And I think, that the pathway, whatever the wisdom or the click in one's mind, the insights that we get, let's share them with one another. I think that's kind of part of it, right? When something clicks for you, it's probably going to click for some other people. And as we receive kind of the wisdom that is in Berkeley, I think we need to be kind of co-producers, right? We need to also transmit some of these things. And when we have more of this kind of sharing going on, I think we all just evolve more quickly. For me, one of those mechanisms, I'll be honest with you, is Twitter. I actually, when I hear a really neat idea, I will tweet it. It's sort of like, look, people can discard it or not read it, but it's sort of like, that's a really fun idea, that idea.
Well, I love that you said that. We do have a Twitter feed for Wisdom Cafe,
okay.
So feel free to use it
at
Wisdom Cafe UCB and tweet those ideas out.
I will do that. I will reference your Twitter handle, and
that would be
great. Happy to. Yeah, I'll make sure I follow it right now. Yeah.
Well, Rich, thanks for everything you do for UC Berkeley, and thanks for your time today.
Thank you very much.